Today, almost 1.4 million inhabitants of Mizoram are sprawled across the lush, rolling Zo hills, where concrete and nature are nestled alongside each other. But there's a lot of backstory that has led the Mizo people to these modern circumstances. Welcome back to Hello Mizoram. Today, we are at Zokwa, which is a reconstruction of a typical Mizo village as it would have been laid out by our Mizo ancestors centuries ago. Now, this place is within the Re'ek tourism area, and it is managed by the tourism department. Centuries ago, the Mizos had already developed this preference for building and organizing their villages in elevated environments. Now, this was a strategic move because the mountainous terrain would have served as a defensive outpost against rival tribes, and it also gave them enough land for them to set up villages that revealed a very distinctive, multifaceted social hierarchy. According to several Mizo historians, the early Mizo tribe had adopted a semi-nomadic way of life that was affected by a number of factors, possibly wanting to escape those who ruled the plain areas, or perhaps the reason was famine, tribal rivalry, or even superstition. This decision to shift upwards into the mountainous terrain is interesting because the plain areas were usually far more fertile. There is evidence that they had migrated and once settled in the plains of the Chinduan River, the Kaboa Valley, and the Kampat Plains, but they always moved to the hilly areas. Their style of agriculture was also very labor-intensive, with relocation becoming necessary when soil fertility diminished. When a section of the Mizo community wanted to set up a new village, they would send a vanguard of 4 or 5 individuals who would set out on a journey to find a new settlement site. Now, they would stay the night at a possible site and have a rooster with them. If the rooster crowed, then it was a good sign, a good omen that this was indeed a suitable place. If the rooster did not crow, then not only was it thought that the place was unsuitable, it would be thought that there was evil spirits or dark forces at work. Once the land had been chosen in this way, they would then start to cultivate the fields nearby and harvest enough rice for the whole village. This was so that nobody would have to worry about starving when they started to actually set up the site. Next, the best plots of land would be allocated for the building of the chief's house and the Zolbuk, followed by the next best plots of land for the Upa, who were the village elders. After this higher-ranking class of Mizo society had selected their plots, only then would everyone else, the commoners, be able to choose plots of land for themselves. Before reaching the village, a significant site known as Botswa marked the beginning of the village's entrance. This location would be where multiple roads converged, leading to other villages, areas from where firewood would be collected, and even the jhum fields that they cultivated. At this juncture, many villages would also have a structure called lungdo, featuring a stone that was ideal for resting or performing ceremonial acts. The villagers maintained a close relationship with the natural environment and relied heavily on forest resources for their daily necessities, including sustenance, medicinal herbs, and raw materials for construction and handicrafts. In fact, N.E. Perry observed that for a very long time, the Mizos grew all their own food and made their own clothes, resulting in minimal reliance on currency. However, the advent of British colonial rule in the late 19th century led to substantial transformations that would forever change the face of Mizoram's traditional village life. This wooden post, or a series of them called selupan, would serve as a display for the skulls of hunted animals, symbolizing the grandeur of the village, that there were indeed brave men who were skilled in hunting and warfare. It was customary for successful hunters or warriors, the pasalcha, to halt at this point before entering the village at night. Here, they would await the dawn, chanting victory songs and firing their guns. These chants and the sound of a discharged firearm resonating throughout the night heralded their impending arrival to the villagers, who would prepare themselves to honor their returning heroes. As morning broke, the Pasalcha would enter the village to grand ceremony and reverence. Now, this is the Lalin, which means house of the village chief. And he would have a lot of special features at his residence because remember, he had, first of all, the best plot of the land. For example, he would have a salupan, which is this wooden post featuring the skull of a hunted animal. It would represent the grandeur of the village as well as the chief itself. Similar to the salupan, we also have the mounted skull animal head, which also added grandeur to the chief's residence. So now we're going to take a look inside to see what other special features the chief had at his residence. We have the Summun area here, which was so named because it was the place for grinding rice, with this oversized wooden mortar and pestle called the Sum and Suk, which is why this place is called Summun. This object here, which is a large tube of bamboo with holes carved into its hollow, was specifically crafted to accommodate small articles like necklaces and other special items. It would usually be located near the kumpui, which was the main bed of the house. This bed was usually allocated to the parents of the household. Children or unmarried girls would sleep on another smaller bed, while older boys inhabited the village zolbuk. This small room you see here was a common feature in many chief houses and is called vanlung. This room would be reserved for the slave of the chief. The open area outside the chief's house was the lalmual, and it was designated for ceremonial events like the kwangtsoi, as well as other ceremonies and traditional dances. The chief was also privy to having many special features, including his own balcony that oversaw the rest of the village. The chief's house would be quite well stocked with meat, rice, and grain because everyone submitted a portion of whatever they had harvested or killed in the wild. That being said, Animesh Ray writes that the presents given to the chief were often treated as common property, and all villagers could take some share out of it when they needed it, even though in essence the chief owned the entire village and the surrounding land. Each village was overseen by a chief, locally known as Lal. The chief held a considerable level of authority and often collaborated with a council of elders called the Upa, all of whom would also have their residences very nearby. Together, they would make decisions that affected every aspect of the community, including resolving disputes, assigning land, and managing village resources, to name a few. According to Mizo historian James Dokhuma, all the villagers would voluntarily offer their services to build his residence, the Lalin, as well as voluntarily help him in his cultivation if he had any. But the chief could not overstep the people's obedience and loyalty because tyrants and dictators were not acceptable to the Mizo people, who, as free agents, could choose to migrate to a rival chief or tribe at any point in time. On top of the fireplace hearth, there would often be a shelf or two made out of bamboo and wood. The lower shelf was sometimes used to store unhusked rice because the heat from the fireplace below helped warm it up, while the upper shelf was called rapuitsungsang and would hold agricultural tools. This area is called the Tuiumhuna, where the precious commodity of water was stored in these hollow bamboo tubes called tuium. So important was the role of the village chief in the functioning and status of the village that Captain T.H. Lewin wrote about it in the late 19th century. Among these hill tribes, we find an actual existing system in practical working, which might well be classed among the visions of utopian philosophy. Their mode of government may be described as a democracy tempered by disposition. Another very important distinctive feature of the Lalin is the Lalsangpuii, which is this wooden post in the chief's residence. Now, whenever somebody had committed a crime, no matter how serious, even if they had killed someone, if they ran into the chief's house and grabbed a hold of this wooden post, they would be immediately forgiven. But there was a catch. Once their transgressions were forgiven by the chief, what would happen is they would automatically become slaves to the chief until one of them died. Now, this custom was open to any person within the chief's community or anybody else fleeing from another tribe or chief as well. This construction here, situated right outside the chief's house, is the zao. This gazebo-like structure was a very special privilege that not even every chief was able to have. Only chiefs or those esteemed men who had earned the title of Thangtuapa, who had also completed the Kuangtsoi ceremony at least 3 times, were able to construct one adjacent to their home. To find out exactly just how tremendous a feat this was, and what a status symbol this structure would have been, check out our video on Tlanrokpa Kuangtsoi and why it elevated the positions of those who could successfully achieve it. Once the zao had been constructed, it would be quite a multi-purpose facility. The daughter of the chief would be able to invite her friends and they would practice their weaving, and the chief himself could also use it for a place of relaxation and meetings when he had guests from other villages. And here we are at the residence of the Khonbol. The Khonbol were the councilors to the local chief, and that is why they got this prime spot very near to the chief's house, which is right over there. They also had special features at their residence, such as this Lalsangpuii, which acted as a kind of balcony where the young men of the village would be able to spend time in the evenings playing instruments and singing along and courting girls. They too had special privileges, like having a balcony for extra ventilation, as well as features like this structure affixed to the wall here, which is where they would raise chickens and have extra storage facilities for other agricultural tools. Not only were they councilors to the chief, but the Khonbol would even have the authority to step in as acting chief if he happened to be traveling somewhere. This is a reconstruction of the house of the Thangtuapa, a revered figure within the community whose significant position we've talked about in the last video. Their residence is different from the other houses in many ways because their great accomplishments, displayed evidently here by the many animal skulls mounted on the exterior and interior of the house, earned them the right to have many special privileges, such as windows in their home, a rear door that allowed for more lighting and more ventilation, the right to have partitions within the house, the right to have a selupan posted outside their house, a Lalsangpuii balcony, and so much more. Make sure to check out our video on the history of the Kuangtsoi ceremony that really explains why it was such an incredible feat to be able to become a Thangtuapa in early Mizo society. And here we are at the Namzom Inn. The Namzom were any members of the community who did not belong to the ruling clan, and this is why their residence was built as basic as possible. There's no salupan, there's no Lalsangpuii, and if you come inside, you'll see there are no windows either, which is possibly to demonstrate the destitution that they faced. And here we are at the Meithai Inn. The Meithais were widows of the village, and unfortunately they were the more destitute members of the community, which is why their house again has no windows, no Lalsangpuii, no special features in its architecture. And not only that, the location of the Meithai Inn is significant because look at where it is compared to the rest of the village. Nevertheless, when villagers who were better off came back with bounty from the fields, or the warrior hunters, the Pasalcha, came back from a successful hunt, the whole town would be able to share in their wins. As Mizo historian Lalthangliana puts it, no one would be left behind. revealing the spirit of generosity and camaraderie that our Mizo ancestors had towards each other. For the widow, the entire community would come together to construct a home for her and her children, a practice that is still seen today in modern-day Mizoram. Now, this is the house of the commoners, the common man, and it was called Minaran Inn. And it's a far cry from the Thangtuapa Inn because it has no windows inside, and it's just a basic structure lifted high up on stilts, as you can see over here. And the reason for that is it safeguarded the property against wildlife attacks and flooding. One important member of the community linked to the chief was the town crier, or tlangao. Every village had one, and this person would go around the village every day proclaiming the chief's orders. A routine duty he performed was to announce the distribution of compulsory work among the villagers for the next day. Just like the town blacksmith, in payment, the tlang'a would often get a basket of paddy from each household. Another significant individual at every early Mizo society village was the Puitiam, or priest, who would be included in village administration next to the chief's elders. The village priest occupied an important position in the village hierarchy, not only in religious and festive programs, but in marriages and death ceremonies, curing the sick, and animal sacrifice. Now, each village also featured a boom, which was a repository for all the agricultural tools and weapons. It was the workshop of the tirdeng, which is the blacksmith of the village. And for his services, he would get a basket of paddy from each household in the village every year. Now, so important was the role of the tirdeng that he would often be included in discussions held by the chief and his elders. Now, one interesting aspect about this structure, the boom, is that it was exclusively for the use of the men in the village, and no women were allowed. However, should a woman come needing the services of the blacksmith, it was always immediately understood that that would only be the case because there were no men in her household who were able to do so themselves. And usually it also meant that she was a widow. So it was an unspoken word that all the men, no matter how long the queue was for the blacksmith, would allow her to cut in line so that she could get her tools repaired or made immediately with no delay. Interestingly, on the other hand, the tuikur, which is the village water source, or usually the water well, that would be the place solely for women where no men were allowed in turn. But if a man did indeed arrive at the water well, needing to draw water, it would also be immediately understood that no women in his household were able to do so. And in this case, it would be the women who would allow the man to draw water first. Now, this is where the Mizo phrase comes from, Buma meitia anlal, tuikura mipa anlal, which means women are sovereign at the blacksmiths and men are sovereign at the water well. This mutual understanding is such a good example of how early Mizo society really understood the role that each member and gender played in the community. And it also demonstrates in Lalsangpuii, which essentially means a wide berth of understanding, especially for when your neighbor was going through challenges in their life. As we've seen so far just from the structural organization of this traditional Mizo village, we see the different roles and circumstances of different strata of early Mizo society, from the elders and councilors to the chief, to the widows and blacksmith of the village. We've seen how the chief's house and zolbuk, because of their status as paramount establishments in the village, occupied center stage and attained the best of the land. Now, behind me is the huge structure, the Zolbuk, which was the repository for cultural traditional knowledge, as well as serving as a dormitory for the young bachelors of the village. But because there is so much detail to get into when we talk about the Zolbuk, we're going to leave it for the next video. We hope you've enjoyed this video on how the traditional Mizo village looked like and functioned hundreds of years ago. See you next time on Hello Mizoram.